Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. My name is Mike. We're going to talk through migrations today because ultimately everybody at this conference had to migrate at some point. It's a big part of the journey that gets you to Snowflake. And for those of you who are just getting started or in the middle, you know how big that is. And you might, like me, find that some of the guidance on how to even think about a migration is a bit lacking. So let's talk migration, because a year ago I sat where those of you are who are not using migration. We signed our contract with Snowflake late June. And I was looking ahead. I wanted to hear about people's experience. I wanted to learn all the best practices, challenges, pitfalls that I could use with my team to help prime that journey. Instead, what I got last year made me feel a little frustrated because I found a lot of cliches, which, okay, they're true, but they're not really that helpful. They're kind of obvious, right? Okay, sure, I should have goals. I should get executive sponsorship. Okay. I also found a lot of really tactical tips, like, great, monitor your warehouse costs. Okay, but that's just like one tiny piece of the whole journey. I need to know more about what to expect. And then finally, I found a lot of hand waving, a lot of like, okay, we chose Snowflake to solve our problems, and now we're live. And they kind of skipped something in the middle there. And so let's actually talk about that middle part. And my hope for you all today is that you will walk away feeling more confident and informed about what to expect. I'm going to try to be more pointed. So whether you're about to start the migration or considering it, or you're in the middle of it, what can you expect? How can you navigate and get to a launch successfully? And something to note on our talk today is I'm not actually going to talk that much about why we like Snowflake. It's not going to be a sales pitch for the tool. Because despite the title, even I'm only going to talk a little bit about why we chose Snowflake over Databricks and Redshift. Other talks here at the conference, sales reps, they'll be happy to tell you all the great things about Snowflake. We do like the tool. We are happy with our choice. But this talk is really meant to be about what is going to happen on the migration. So what are we going to dive into today? We're going to cover a little bit of background. Then we'll dive through our journey of our strategy, setting up Snowflake itself, principles you can follow for execution, and I'll wrap it all up with a cheat sheet for you. So real quick background. Who am I? I've been in data for over 10 years. I started on the analytics side before getting to lead my team here at Guitar Center is a combination of data engineering, BI, analytics, and we're going to build out a data science program. So I am the overall leader of data for our company. I've worked in a variety of industries in the past. This is my first stop at a shop that actually uses, that is retail and that uses Snowflake. So I'm like a long-time follower of Snowflake, first-time customer, and I'm excited to be here. About Guitar Center, again, any musicians in the audience? Awesome. You probably know who we are. Those who might not, we are the nation's largest retailer of musical instruments. We also provide a lot of services, including lessons, and we have a sub-brand that if one of your kids, or if you were like me back in middle school, if you played an instrument in band or orchestra, we provide rentals for that as well. So we are a retailer spread all across the musical industry. And when I joined early last year, we're going to cover the legacy architecture that I found. So this is what we were dealing with, and it might sound familiar to some of you. So this is the target infrastructure that began, right? Makes kind of some sense, right? You got basic sources, you're going to process the data in data stage, you're going to run it in Netezza, you're going to access it in MicroStrategy. So we're talking like about 10 years ago, this is the target. But pretty quickly, people started branching out. Okay, I'm not getting everything I need, so I'm going to build some custom, SQL, and I'm going to access it. I'm going to send those as emails. I'm going to need to pull in like SSRS. And then some people went really rogue and had full shadow DE and BI setups with Access databases and Power BI on top of it. And in the meantime, by the way, it doesn't even fully comprehensive. There are sources of data not integrated, including our web analytics solution. So a few years ago, somebody came in and said, let's launch an AWS stack. Which, fair enough, moving to the cloud makes some sense. Okay, but we're not really going to get fully off of the old system because we have dependencies on the EDW. That red line is actually data coming out of our old on-prem system. And it's, following a new paradigm, but it's a little bit different. It's actually integrating new sources that are not at all part of the old system, including a CDP that the company had launched. And it was not built with Git or CI/CD or any modern best practices, despite the year being 2022. It was being activated in Tableau. And hey, why not throw in Databricks and Pinot just for fun? This was a little bit crazy. And in fact, one of the people who's on my team is sitting here, and she's laughing because this was her about a year and a half ago. No one was happy. This is the why. Why do we migrate? Why do we have to unify our data on Snowflake? Because when you have that mess behind the scenes, it boils down to a lot of problems for the organization. And for us, those 3 problem statements kind of were unreliability. We had more than 5 database solutions providing data to the organization through more than 7 different reporting tools. Everything was ungoverned. It was a bit fragile with the first few months when I joined. The Redshift database didn't even have a production instance. It was all dev, and it was breaking all the time. It was slow, and it was incomplete. People wanted to use Tableau. They had actually been excited for this cloud journey. But everyone had to be a viewer, and data wasn't available at the level that they needed it. Any retailers here? No? Okay, cool. I'm the only retailer. Well, everybody know what a SKU is? If you're in the retail space, you need to see data at a SKU level. And if you don't provide your stakeholders with the data they need, they're not going to use the tools that you give them. They're going to find a way around it. And so everything was not as it needed to be. And in the meantime, people loved the old setup, our EDW and our MicroStrategy. But it's kind of like having a 20-year-old water heater in your house. Someday it's going to break. These are end-of-life technologies. They're on-prem. We have to pay third parties to help us maintain them. Going backwards was not an option. We had to find a path forward. And so from these problem statements, we created a sort of new forward-looking vision statement, which this became the anchor for our migration journey, that we are building a single unified data warehouse on Snowflake. It's going to build with and for the business, and it's going to meet these criteria where it's useful, it's understandable, it's reliable, it's consistent, it's faster, and more flexible. So let's talk about the journey of how we got there. And we're going to follow through the conversation along a few key questions, and this was in the description, right? We're going to use this color coding to help you follow along. The strategy, the operating principles, and Snowflake specifically. I'm going to aim to be a little bit more clear-eyed and specific, give you some takeaways, and in the spirit of sharing, I'm also going to share some of the challenges that we at Guitar Center faced. We were by no means perfect. Some of what is up here is what we sort of learned as a target, but we haven't always hit it. So just know that these are best practices that can guide you on your journey, but it's going to be a difficult journey to get to your migration right. And the overall approach begins with treating it like a product. If you launch any product, any major product launch, you first need to go on a discovery journey. You need to talk to your customers. You need to be clear about what you're solving for and why. For example, if you were going to redesign your website, you wouldn't just go lock yourself in a room and randomly build something. You would go out and understand your users, and you would redesign to meet what are the current pain points, what are the needs. We did this for myself in the first few months, where I had rapid, broad conversations across the entire enterprise, deep conversations with my team about what happened in the past, what's happening in the present, learning to figure out who's using what, why are they using it, what pain do they have, what opportunities did they see, and all about the current setup and the limitations. So you need to treat this like a product setup. It is a major product build out. And like any good major product development process, you want to kind of anchor yourself on some epic stories, right? Like user stories. And for us, that looked like this, right? These became consistent stories that allowed us to communicate with the business around what we're trying to build and solve. We want to give people a familiar experience. We want to make sure that things are consistent across the data reports. This is a major challenge that's probably familiar to many of you. Multiple reports, same metric, different numbers. We had to try to eliminate that, and we wanted it to be performant because things need to load fast. And when I say slow, by the way, just to give you an example, some of the reports that people were trying to load on Tableau took 10 minutes. That's not really feasible. So we needed to overcome that, and this gave us clarity on what we were solving for. It gave us the ability to message to the org so that everybody knows what's being solved. And it allowed us to align the effort of the group as we move forward. And it gives us everybody else something to look forward to. Like, oh, you're going to build something familiar that is going to make my life easier. Great, I can be excited about that. The next step of setting migration strategy is all about what type of strategy is it. You can consider, this in parallel with understanding the product discovery process, but you need to understand your migration type. And what I mean by that is, like, you might be doing a pure lift and shift. If you're lucky and you can do this, you can do things like what we talked about in the keynote yesterday, where you can use code conversions, and maybe you're a Redshift user and your cost just got out of control, or your performance not performance enough, and you just need to do a quick code conversion, and your code's clean enough, you don't have new requirements, you're just moving. Great, you can do a lift and shift. You might be in more of a boat where there is nothing to shift, right? You might have to do a complete new build. You're doing a major business pivot, or the enterprise has never had a single unified data warehouse before. So what are you going to build? What's it going to look like? And here the trade-off is speed and familiarity, right? Like, you're going to have to go slower, and you're going to build something unfamiliar, but maybe it's the right thing to do. And the truth is that there's a lot of spectrum in between these two options, right? Very few migrations are going to be pure lift and shift. Few are completely new unless you're a startup and you've never had anything before. But being honest about this part is really important, because this is going to impact your whole plan. Things are different if you're just doing a straight code conversion versus not. And you need to think about, what's happening with the legacy pieces that you're going to leave behind, how you're going to keep your business running along the way. All of these aspects, as you understand what your actual migration is, will help you set your plan better. And along the way, a parallel consideration is the modeling decisions themselves, because how are you going to model your data? Do you have something to replicate? Are you taking a brand new approach? How's that going to translate with the existing usage at your company? All of this will impact the timeline of your migration, the amount of effort, the usability of what you build. It's a really critical phase, and you have to plan for it to be hard, because it was for us. We thought we'd be here. We thought that we would be pretty close to lift and shift. We had an old on-prem warehouse that people liked. Hey, why don't we just try to move that into the cloud? But the problem was we ended up being more like here. Further over, and why? Because we found a lot of messy code. We found errors. We found outdated logic and bad documentation, or just no documentation. And so that really slowed us down. And that meant that our timeline communicated to the business also was a little bit different than what we would wish we could have achieved. So it led to a challenge with those aspects. And so my encouragement to all of you facing or currently going through a migration is to really be honest with yourself, think about this, and be a little bit more conservative on your timeline, and manage the project so that based on what is your strategy and where you're going to fall, and how are you going to approach the migration, you can set a proper timeline. For us, the outcome of all of this, we went through our product discovery, we set our strategy, we eventually figured out what kind of migration, and we did some tool assessment. We ended up here. This is Guitar Center's new platform vision in simplified form. Now, we took out Databricks. Why? Well, it was actually easy because it was kind of a pure side play to begin with. But also it's a bit more technical requirements. It had a higher total cost of ownership from our perspective. We felt restricted, whereas with Snowflake we felt like it's a more forgiving environment that allowed us to build into the future for what we want. And why not Redshift? Well, we were able to achieve better performance and actually lower cost. And then slightly more important, we felt that Snowflake offers greater integration across building a broader platform versus while AWS is fantastic, only if you know how to put all the pieces together. I actually worked at a previous company where I had a more technical, really startup style engineering team, and they loved that. But depending on your company, that may not be right for you, and that's why we ended up with Snowflake and trying to build modern best practices into the development of our Snowflake warehouse. Now, that gets us to the beginning of execution, where we have to set up Snowflake-specific things. And this is the only setup phase, these few slides that we're going to talk through, that are actually Snowflake-specific, which is a good thing. Snowflake doesn't get in the way of building a good data warehouse. You just want to focus on the more important aspects of your migration, which we're going to talk about later in the slides. But doing this phase well is important because it allows you to do things right and once, which is a concept we'll come back to. And it allows you to feel confident in your ability to scale. So you want to make sure that you are secure, you've set yourself up for good development practices, you have lower total cost of ownership, and you are going to achieve consistency across your Snowflake development. What does that mean? Well, for security, things like role-based access controls. Single sign-on or 2FA, which I think now they're deprecating this password only. But following a multi-factor approach really helps you stay secure, and masking your PII, being thoughtful as you get started about how you're going to manage all these different aspects so that it doesn't get out of control later. Because what you want to avoid is what was in the news around this time last year. How many of you heard about some of the breaches? Right? I have direct connections to 2 companies that were impacted, and the primary culprit was a lack of 2FA. It was just as simple as that. So take security seriously, get it set up from the beginning. Also set up your development environments, multiple accounts, same billing, separate dev versus production. All of that allows you to maintain isolation and have a robust system. I mentioned that when I joined Guitar Center, everything was in dev on Redshift. Well, everything in dev means nothing is actually in prod. And so, sure enough, we had an unstable system. We had a system that would go down, and when we tried to make updates, and that goes downstream, and it looks like we've built a poor platform, and we get yelled at by the executives. So, being thoughtful about how you're going to have clean development sets you up for success. Taking advantage of the many Snowflake features allows you to keep your total cost of ownership low. Things like being deliberate about not only the size of your warehouses, but the names and the utilization allows you to track your costs and understand where it's going and then optimize it down the road. Now, we took an approach in development of hey, don't shortcut yourself, go extra large if you need to, move fast, but then come back and clean it up later, which requires that you be thoughtful about your warehouse sizing. You can, and this is an area where if you're taking advantage of all the things like no distribution keys needed, no vacuum operations needed, no leveraging you can leverage the micro partitions and data clustering in Snowflake, all of that adds up to lower total cost of ownership on your engineering group. You don't have to invest as much time as you do with other tools. That keeps your costs low. So pretty clear benefit, right? We actually found that we're projecting that our total cost with Snowflake is going to be lower than what it was on Redshift, which is pretty, not always the same story that you hear from people, but we're able to achieve it. And then finally, setting up, standard practices, standard operating procedures, like we have a SQL style guide, a DBT style guide, having clear roles and responsibilities within your code bases, going out to the community, leveraging proven solutions, all of that adds up to consistency so that as you scale up your warehouse, you can understand it, you can maintain it. You kind of want to think about the version of yourself 2 years from now. Are you going to be cursing yourself because there's no documentation and there's no cleanliness and consistency in your warehouse? Be kind to your future self. So this is actually, I have a personal experience with this not happening. When I joined Udacity, this was my previous company years ago, they had anyone can write a DAG, that DAG can have a custom SQL, everyone approves their own PR, that PR goes into production, anybody can connect the data to our BI tool and write their custom SQL there, and God help you if you can figure out where the data came from, right? This is the Wild West. Many of you are nodding along, you've experienced similar. You need to set yourself up from the beginning to achieve consistency. So you have all these different configurations in place for Snowflake. You're going to be on a good path to success as you scale up. And by the way, my rep just must have gotten a call. He just walked out. But Snowflake has been very helpful to us. So for those of you who are in the process or thinking about Snowflake, leverage them as a resource. They're a great partner as you're migrating. Now let's talk about operating principles for success. And the first one is probably the most critical. Change management. This borders a bit on the cliches I mentioned very early on. So we're gonna, but I'm gonna try to get specific and clear because change management is important. We are changing something, right? You are going to not only change the back end that most of the rest of the business doesn't care about, you're going to change how that flows through into the front end that they do care about and the data that they use and the things that they trust. And change evokes many feelings in different people. Some people embrace it, but other people get scared or angry, and so you have to plan for those feelings. You want yourself to feel in control, which requires you to have a bit of a plan. And you want your many stakeholders to feel like they're at ease, like, oh, there's a clear plan, I'm informed, I know what's going to happen, right? Constant communication up and down is really important in this phase because while the enterprise is waiting for the big payoff of your migration and all the great things that you've promised of why you're doing this, you want to maintain focus and actually make progress and not get distracted. So for myself, I've met with our management committee of executives several times, presented to the full company several times every few months. We've set up email groups and Teams communities. We've built Confluence pages. We've shared those. We've brought in particular data champions for UAT processes. We are making sure that we are doing our very best to be out there communicating and connecting with our business stakeholders so that they feel informed. And for us, actually a part of that change is our front door. We've actually been migrating our BI as well to another new tool called Omni that we're very happy with, but it's more change. And so we've had to hold people's hands as they go through that process and keep them motivated, planning for dependencies, and all of those things. And what does that look like? Some specific aspects of change management. There are foundations for success that you want to have as you're getting started. You need to be able to communicate exactly why this change is needed and why it's needed now. You need to make sure you have enough resources. Don't start a migration if you don't have enough resources. You should create a clear picture of success, which is, for us, looked like this statement. And you need to align your incentives of the business as best you can, that they're on your team. They're helping you move into that new world of the migration. Other aspects of change management, including stakeholders, having a radical focus, and I really mean that. We have set a bar where we're trying to achieve 80% plus of our engineering team's time on the migration, which is a high bar, but we're having to say no to a lot of things, but that's the radical focus. And designing change itself almost like a product. Discovering what aspects need to be planned for. Defining a roadmap for navigating the change with different stakeholders, developing and deploying in iterations, learning from it, getting feedback, right? Having milestones along the way are really helpful for us. One of those early milestones leveraged Snowflake's zero ETL integration with Salesforce. That allowed us to instantly get that group who was using our Salesforce data unlocked and using data from Snowflake, which is not something we would have otherwise been able to do as quickly. And by having something tangible, it helps people feel bought in and like we're moving and making progress. And another way to think about ROI, which you're going to get asked about as you go through this change process, for us, that's time savings. We are sending out a stakeholder survey to our audience, or not just our audience, a large audience of everybody user at across the enterprise. And we're asking a number of questions, key KPIs, but one of them that we began asking is, how much time are you spending getting data? Not using it. Using it's good, but having to get it, accessing it, finding it, understanding it, munging it together in Excel, cleaning it up, fixing errors, asking questions why this number is different, all that crap that adds up to hours and hours per week on an average person's time. By baselining that, we're tracking that going down, and it adds up to millions of dollars of operational time that we can give back to the business, and we can quantify, therefore, the impact of this platform migration. Another operating principle is managing trade-offs, right? This is a close cousin of change management, but it's necessary if you're going to maintain radical focus because you need to know what you're not doing. There are always choices to be made, and the sooner and clearer you make them, the better, because everything you're doing is itself a choice. Like whether you explicitly state that I'm doing A and not B, that's what's happening, right? So you've actually made that choice implicitly, might as well make it explicitly and let people understand where you're choosing to make trade-offs. And that can be in things that allows you to stay focused and do it right the first time. Like I said, we've really set a high bar for our internal engineering, how we're trying to say no to a lot of things. But as all of you know, you cannot abandon the business. You have to provide some ongoing support. So, having a clear picture of what you can say yes to and what you can say not to, and and if some new urgent priority comes up, what is the trade-off that you have to make in order to meet that? How's that going to impact your timeline? Managing those trade-offs. For us, we also had to manage resource flexibility. Our data engineering group is a bit more back-end platform engineers as well as some analytics engineers, but we were able to kind of cross-train and leverage people in different ways over time so that wherever the heaviest lifting is, we can be flexible and be clear about our choices. For us, we also had to do some talent upskilling over the last year. We hired a very senior engineer early on. Like, you need to make sure that you are matching your talent to the requirements of your engineering, and that's a trade-off. You as leaders need to be clear about what it was going to take to drive success. And then finally, investment choices. This goes both dollars and time. You might, for example, decide to go pursue a tool that helps you do some code conversion, or an outside consultant agency that's going to augment your staff for a while. You might need to make a short-term prioritization of team's time versus a long-term. All of these are trade-off decisions. Where are you investing budget? Where are you not? How much does that impact your timeline? And the more you can be clear on that and again communicate it to your leaders, the more success you're going to have and buy-in from the organization about getting what you need and then sticking to your timeline. Now for us, we had a challenge at this stage also where there was learning curves. For those of you who are not yet on Snowflake or in the process, you might be like us where some of the folks of your team are not cloud natives. They don't know DBT or CI/CD as well. You have to build those practices internally. This slowed us down. So you can expect that that's a challenge that you will face or something similar. People will be excited though, like, hey, I get to learn something new. So that's a motivating factor, but you have to manage that challenge along the way and how that's going to impact your timeline. This is an interesting view that we wanted to share with you around how we looked at the result of all this. Like, how did this add up to our timeline? And the color coding here is not about difficulty, it's more about just time and effort. I didn't add a unit of time at the top because it's going to be different for every company. How large are you? How complex is your migration? How many elements are you unifying? But in relative terms, you're going to begin spending a ton of time and focus on your setups. And you're going to move into ingestion, and then asset creation. This is the data modeling phase, right? This is you creating your data marts and your key tables that are going to power your reports analysis and ultimately AI. And all along the way, you need to have tight project management, but especially as you transition coming out of the setup and into the build phase. For us, I've been tracking that. If you've noticed the top right, I've kind of been giving a little preview of how long this has taken us. But late summer and starting late summer last fall, we spent about 3 hard months on all the setup. And the long tail continued for about another 2. The ingestion began late last fall, continued through the winter, and we're still in that long tail, but the effort's getting lower because most of our data ingestion has been set up. We are still right in the heart of that AE asset creation. We are building our most complex data models right now. We went through the peak of demands on our project management complexity probably over the winter, late winter, as we were just having to navigate a lot of moving pieces. So this can give you a sense of like where you're gonna have to spend time as you go through your migration journey. Coming back to operating principles, being action-oriented is something I wanted to emphasize, right? This has been tied in with some of the earlier points, but it's around having that tight planning and project management that allows you to deliver something tangible. At the end of the day, the migration is not going to be perfect, and it's going to take a while, so you just got to get started. You got to get buy-in and adoption from people by just moving forward, showing them some things. This can have early wins. I mentioned the Salesforce integration was our biggest one for ourselves, but you can find other ways to just kind of get people's hands on the new stuff, get feedback, get experimentations, show them something, don't just tell them. We also phased our delivery. Going back to that spider's web at the beginning, we had a lot of components that we're working on unifying, but we've focused our first phase on replacing the core old on-prem system. And that's going to allow us to migrate the most use cases and get all of the SQL writers, the email reports, the old tools, ever that's going to be able to unify onto our new platform. But even when we get the data there, we're going to, again, take a phased approach with our users. One group at a time, holding their hand and then closing the door behind them so that we can actually achieve the migration. And iterations, for example, like as we've been going through the migration, we needed to get a lot of feedback. We've launched data objects like our product taxonomy, and we got feedback from our users that found, okay, our new data model is not meeting the spec. So we need to go back and iterate. By taking that approach, we've been able to deliver a better product. And that actually touches on one of the challenges that we are facing, and I expect you might face as well, data reconciliation. You have an original source. People are going to compare you versus that original source. That's time consuming, but it's necessary because at the end of the day, trust is key, and you need people to be trusting you so they'll adopt. There are tools out there that will do this automatically if it works for you in your situation to help speed up data validation at the time. All right, so where are we? What is our project status? Well, Databricks is gone. I mentioned it was kind of a side play to begin with. Redshift has been greatly reduced, but it's not gone yet. We expect it to be mostly off by the end of the year. Snowflake itself. We're about 50% of our core data objects in production with another 30% getting close to UAT. We're expecting to get to our major milestone by late summer, very late summer, maybe back to school timeframe, call it. And in the meantime, we're actually expanding in parallel. We've been able to fill some of those gaps. If you recall my slide earlier, there were data sources that were never integrated into the original architecture. We're already filling some of those gaps along the way. And, the legacy on-prem, we hope that in early 2026 we can actually cut off access and deprecate it. That's our status. And I will say that all throughout this talk, I've deliberately focused on our data warehouse migration. But as most of you will know, that's like only one phase of the full migration picture that your company will face. There's BI unification, empowering self-service. You're going to try to actually unlock AI interactivity. You're going to want to build data products, ML. Like, we're looking forward to that too. And all of the talks at this conference, like for example, the keynotes, are exciting features, but the core assumption built into everything is your data is all nice and clean and in Snowflake so that you can use those features. We're getting there, and then we're going to leap forward as soon as we can. But for this talk, we talk about how do you actually get your data into Snowflake, which then unlocks so much more possibilities. So I mentioned, we have these 3 questions that have been guiding us. Here's the summary, right? These few key points, you could like print this out and stick it up for yourself, remind you. I pretty much did the same thing. Treat it like a product. Figure out what your migration type is and how you're going to model your data. Then you need to expect delays and bake that into your timeline and your communications so that you ideally can underpromise, overdeliver, surprise and delight. You want to set up Snowflake right from the beginning so that you're not one of those companies that gets in the news later for problems on security or just having executives upset about how things are functioning. Get it right. Orient yourself once you get started towards action and delivery and iteration, and make sure you're prioritizing change in project management along the way, because that's going to be your friend. Now, there's a couple other points that I didn't even have time to talk about in the talk, but if you're going through the process of choosing new tools, make sure that you're considering the real needs of the business, not just their wants, because everybody wants lots of cool things, but what does your business really need? What fits best together? And that you're planning a bit longer term, not just for what's right in front of you. You're going to have to plan for talent and investments and trade-offs. We did talk about trade-offs, but talent is a whole thing, and spending time on your modeling choices. So that's our migration cheat sheet. I do want to, before I completely end, I wanted to throw up a slide that just says thank you to all the people who actually made this possible. I get to stand here and talk about this, but this is really my team that has done all the hard work. Across, engineers do the building, of course, but then they rely for a lot of business context and UAT from the rest of the organization. So grateful to them, proud of my team, and thank you very much.